Chapter 7. Learning to Hide. September 1945, Seoul. 3 weeks had passed since Sumiko's parents left for Japan, and she was beginning to understand what her father had meant about survival. The initial euphoria of liberation had given way to something more complex and dangerous. American forces were present in Seoul, but their control was limited, and in the spaces between their patrols, old resentments were settling into new patterns of power. Every day brought stories of Japanese civilians being attacked, their property seized, their children spat upon in the streets. Sumiko learned to move differently through the city she had once called home. Gone were the confident strides of a colonial official's daughter. Now she kept her head down, her voice soft, her Japanese features as inconspicuous as possible. Baksanajama had taught her to bind her hair in the Korean style and dress in the simpler clothes of a working woman rather than the refined fabrics that marked her former status. Walk like you belong here, Baksan had instructed, watching Sumiko practice a more humble gait around their small courtyard. Not like you own the place, but like you've always been welcome in it. It was harder than it sounded. 19 years of unconscious privilege were difficult to unlearn. The way she held her shoulders, the manner in which she spoke to shopkeepers, even the way she counted money, all of it had to be adjusted, softened, made less obviously Japanese. The language lessons with Lee Jaehyuk had become both more precious and more dangerous. The YMCA still operated, but under increasing scrutiny from various Korean political factions who viewed any remnant of the colonial administration with suspicion. Some evenings, Sumiko would arrive to find the building locked, with whispered explanations about political meetings or security concerns. When classes did meet, the dynamic had shifted entirely. The handful of Japanese students who had attended before liberation had all departed with their families. Now the classroom was filled entirely with Koreans, some learning to read and write their own language after years of forced Japanese education, others improving their skills to participate in the new political landscape. Sumiko was the only Japanese person left. She felt the weight of their stares, the careful politeness that barely concealed suspicion, and, in some cases, outright hostility. A few times students had asked pointed questions. Why was she still here? What gave her the right to learn their language when her people had tried to destroy it? Didn't she understand that Korea was for Koreans now? Lee Jaehyuk deflected these challenges with careful diplomacy, but Sumiko could see the strain it put on him. She was becoming a liability to his reputation, a reminder of collaboration that could damage his standing in the new Korea. After one particularly tense evening, when a student had openly questioned her presence, Sumiko lingered after class, pretending to organize her notes while the others filed out. "Sien Sengnam," she said quietly when they were alone. "Maybe I should stop coming to classes." Jaehyuk looked up from packing his materials, and she saw something flash in his eyes, disappointment or perhaps relief. "Is that what you want?" "It's what would be easiest for you." He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Over the past months, he had watched her transform from the confident young woman who had first approached him with curiosity about Korean culture into someone who seemed to shrink a little more each day. "Sumiko-sen," he said, "finally, do you remember what I told you that night in the rain? About how you were different?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "I meant it, but being different in the old Korea and being different in this Korea, those are two entirely different challenges." "I know that," she said quietly. "I'm learning exactly how different they are." "Are you?" He moved closer, lowering his voice. "Because from where I stand, it looks like you're trying to become invisible. That's not the same as learning to belong. What choice do I have? Every time I speak Korean, they hear my accent. Every time I bow, they can tell I learned Japanese etiquette first. Every time I try to pay for something, the shopkeepers look at me like I'm stealing their liberation." "So you're giving up?" The question stung because it was partially true. Over the past weeks, Sumiko had found herself retreating further and further into the safety of Baksan Ajama's small world. She helped with household tasks, practiced her Korean with someone who was patient with her mistakes, and ventured out into the larger city as little as possible. "I'm trying to survive," she said defensively. "Survival and living are different things," Jaehyuk replied. "And if you're just trying to survive, until what? Until when, Sumiko-san? Until Korea becomes safe for Japanese people again? Until your parents come back for you? Until you decide to follow them to Japan, after all?" Each question hit like a physical blow because she didn't have good answers for any of them. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't know what I'm waiting for anymore." Jaehyuk was quiet for several moments, and when he spoke again, his voice was gentler. "There's something you need to understand about this new Korea. It's not just about language or customs or even politics. It's about Han." She had learned the word in class, the uniquely Korean concept of deep sorrow mixed with hope, of suffering that transformed into determination. Han is what happens when a people endures generations of oppression but refuses to let it break their spirit. He continued. It's what drove the independence movement. It's what's driving the celebrations in the streets. And it's what's driving the anger toward people who look like you. So there's no place for me here. "I didn't say that." He hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "But if you're going to stay, you need to understand that you can't just learn to speak Korean or dress like a Korean woman. You need to understand Han. You need to find a way to share in the suffering that created it." Sumiko looked at him, confused. "How can I share in suffering that I didn't experience? How can I understand Han when I was part of the system that created it?" "That," Jaehyuk said, "is exactly the question you need to answer. Because until you do, you'll always be an outsider trying to look in, rather than someone who belongs." He finished packing his materials and moved toward the door, then paused. "There's a memorial service next week," he said without looking back at her, "for Korean independence fighters who died during the occupation. It's being held at Tapgal Park. If you truly want to understand what it means to be Korean, you might consider attending." "Would that be appropriate?" "I don't know," he said honestly, "but maybe that's something you need to figure out for yourself." After he left, Sumiko sat alone in the empty classroom, surrounded by the chalk dust and lingering echoes of Korean voices. Through the window, she could see Seoul transforming itself in the gathering dusk, Korean signs replacing Japanese ones, traditional clothing appearing on streets where Western dress had been encouraged, the sound of Korean songs drifting from windows that had once been silent. She was 19 years old, utterly alone, and trying to find her place in a world that had no clear space for someone like her. But as she gathered her own materials and prepared to walk home through streets that grew more foreign to her each day, she realized that Jaehyuk was right about one thing. She had been trying to survive rather than to live. And survival, she was learning, was a much lonelier existence than she had ever imagined. The question was whether she had the courage to try something different,